Chris McCarthy, PhD, Dr. McCarthy is the co-founder and director of clinical services of Beacon Career Services, specializing in career assessment and planning. He received his PhD in counseling psychology from Georgia State University. In addition to his work with Beacon, he is currently a professor in the Department of Educational Psychology at the University of Texas. He teaches career development at the graduate level and conducts research on the career transition process. His work has been published in Career Development Quarterly and the Journal of Employment Counseling. Let's give it up for Dr. McCarthy. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. I'm going to try and balance using this clicker and this microphone, so hopefully I'll be able to do that successfully. Like I said, it's an honor to be here, and I want to just kind of preface my talk by saying that I think one of the things that is important if you're a job seeker, which I assume most or all of you are, is that you have, I think, essentially two tasks to manage. One, obviously, is getting everything going, making sure you find that right job for you, getting all the information, all that kind of stuff, skills, all the stuff you've been hearing about this morning. The second thing, too, is that you need to kind of keep your life on track, keep the stress levels manageable for yourself. Can I see a show of hands for how many people find the job search process at least somewhat stressful? All right, I'm not surprised. And so I guess my message today is to really hopefully give you information for that part of it, is things to kind of keep yourself on track, keep stress manageable, and to just pay attention to that part of it, because I think particularly when you're in some kind of transition, like a career transition, it's easy to get very caught up in all the things you have to do. And that's important. You need to do things to get yourself in position to find that right job. But along the way, you have to also make sure that you take care of yourself, because that's going to make your job search process go that much better. And it's going to kind of keep you together so that you don't have so much stress that it overwhelms you and gets in the way of finding a job. Does that make sense? So that's basically what I want to talk about today in the time that I have. So I'm going to try and present some information that I hope you'll find useful, and I want to leave some time at the end if people have comments or questions. I've been doing career work at our university for about 20 years. I've been teaching it at the graduate level, at the undergraduate level. I also do research. Interestingly, to me at least, I do a lot of research with teachers. So it was interesting to hear some of you who are new job seekers were former teachers. Would people mind kind of showing their hands? How many of you are former teachers? Okay, quite a few. All right. Oh, wow, several. Okay. How many of you are aspiring teachers who want to go into teaching? Okay, this troubles me. Okay, good. Thank you. All right, one person. Awesome. Okay, great. The reason I mention that is because part of my research that I do through the university is with understanding how stress impacts the work, lives, and career plans of teachers. And right now we have this is kind of a side note, but we have a real crisis in education where teachers are leaving, and actually as of a few years ago, the most common teacher had just 1 year of experience, because so many teachers leave in the first couple of years. So part of my research has been focused on really understanding why that happens, how stress affects teachers. I mean, it may seem obvious, but I think we need to address that problem. And so a lot of what I'll talk about today actually is part of my research work too, and has shown up a lot that not every teacher is necessarily stressed out and intending to leave, but it's pretty easy to identify some of the ones that are. So, I did form this company, Beacon Career Services, where we work individually with people who want support, assistance, and help with their career search process. In the back of the room are Ann McKinley and Tommy Chiodo. Would you all mind? They're part of our services, and if you have any questions about what we do afterwards, they'll be happy to kind of talk with you in the back and kind of talk more about the kind of things we do, or if you have questions in general. So I'm going to go ahead and get started so that I also keep on track, hold up my end of the deal. And so what I want to do basically is talk about a few things today. I want to talk to you about what stress is, because I think many times people experience stress, but they don't necessarily understand like kind of how it affects them or what's involved in the stress process. So I want to talk about that a little bit. The second thing I want to do is talk about how coping can help you manage that stress, what kinds of coping you can do to actually manage that stress. And the third thing is to be more specific about which skills can be helpful to you in the career search process. So first I want to say a little bit about what stress is. If I say to you, what is stress? Would anybody mind kind of saying what comes to mind when I say, what is stress? Anybody want to? Yes, sir. Anxiety. Okay, feelings of anxiety. Yes.
It's the amount of stuff on top of your usual stuff that you can or cannot handle depending on how heavy and bad the stuff is.
Wow. I need to write that down, I think. This is being recorded, so I might have to go back. So it's the amount of stuff on top of everything else that you kind of have to do or that's kind of piling up. Okay. I saw...
Not feeling in control.
Okay, not feeling in control. Thank you.
Anything that triggers the flight or fight reflex.
Ah, okay, the fight or flight reflex. Yeah, so anything that kind of triggers that. This is great. Okay, fear of the unknown, which is kind of related to control, right? I mean, the things we don't know are the things that are probably going to be most likely to cause us stress. Yes, ma'am?
So being stretched.
Being stretched.
So a little bit of stress can be a good thing.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of how much stress.
So something that goes beyond what you're comfortable managing or coping with, right? And that was kind of several other definitions.
People say the fight or flight, but they forget the freeze.
Okay.
It's fight or flight or freeze.
Right.
You can be immobilized by it.
Yes, so it actually, yeah, you're right. And I'll mention fight or flight, but that's exactly right. That it really, the way the process really works is freeze, fight or flight, right? Has everybody had that? I've had that like on Mopac where I just freeze up and my body has gone into like, panic mode and I didn't even know what was going on. And that's helpful to us, right? Because sometimes we encounter things that we need to act right away, but...
I think it's important to make the distinction between stress and distress.
Okay.
Because some stress can be very positive.
Yes.
Spur you on to do things you may not have known you could do or
Yes.
couldn't do.
Yes. So we'll return to that. That's a great distinction. So none of our lives will ever be without stress. We all know that, right? And a little bit of stress can be a good thing, right? And I'll talk about that as well. And that really will help all of you, I think, in the job search process, is to have I like the word challenge, a manageable level of challenge. I perform at my best when I'm challenged, that I've got things I need to do that are important, and then I've got resources that I can use to help me meet them. And when those things are in balance, I'm usually at my best. I'm challenged. But if those things are out of whack, either the demands are too high or too low. So I think that's also an important thing for those of you who are job seeking is the sources of stress in work don't just come from high demand levels, they come from too low demand levels, that you've got a set of skills that you know you can use effectively in the workplace. And if you're in a job that doesn't let you use those things or ask you to use skills that you don't have, that can also be a source of stress. Does that make sense? So stress really came out of engineering. So if we have engineerings here, they may... Yes? Pardon? Yeah, so it's a level of force applied to a material, right? So that's really important when we're thinking about building bridges or things like that, that we make sure we build structures that can withstand a certain amount of stress. And that was applied by psychologists understanding human stress. So when we talk about stress, and several of you, when we're talking about definitions, had the same kind of idea, that there are external forces that are putting pressure on us that seem like too much for us to handle at some points. So stress is kind of in our DNA. I want to make that point up front, that we are kind of born, we inherited this freeze, fight, or flight response, and it was very adaptive thousands and thousands of years ago when people were being chased by predators and we faced all kinds of threats from our environment. That response was very helpful. It's born into us, okay? So in some ways you can kind of think of it as an evolutionary hangover, because most of the things that we have to deal with today, traffic, family, finding jobs, will engage that stress response when it feels like it's too much. But unfortunately, the stress response doesn't help us today, right? Because several of you mentioned the things that go along with being stressed out, like tension, anxiety, those kinds of things. Those don't really help when you're trying to do the things you need to do the job search process. So in some ways, we've got this inbred system that we need to manage. And most of the people who survived to pass on their genes, you know, from thousands and thousands of years ago, were the most nervous people, right? I mean, the people who thousands of years ago survived predators, survived threats in the environment, were probably the most uptight, paranoid, and hypertense people, right? Because they are the ones who survived, and they passed on their genes, and we are the proud beneficiaries of all that worry that they passed on. Okay, so I think that's helpful just to keep in mind that many of us have that, but we don't really need it anymore. Because the fight or flight response is not going to help you when you're doing an interview or looking for information or any of that kind of stuff. In fact, it can get in the way. It can interfere with your ability to be at your best, and it can also cause you, all kinds of problems in the long run. It can interfere with your sleep, with your diet, all that kind of stuff. So with my little laser pointer, I want to say, in some ways, job loss or job seeking can feel very much the same to your body as an onrushing tiger. Okay, one of my early books that I wrote on stress, I just kind of wrote like a general audience book on stress, and I wanted to call it Fighting Invisible Tigers. Okay, they wouldn't let, the publisher had another title, and it was 9, that was another story, but the idea is that our body still responds the way it would as if a tiger was chasing us through the jungle. Okay, it doesn't understand the difference. Your brain does, but once your brain tells your body something is out there that's a real threat to me, your body's going to kick into that stress response. And it's only got one stress response. It doesn't have a stress response for job seeking and a stress response for fighting tigers. It just has one stress response. And that involves, all the things we're already talking about: heart rate, being stressed out, being unable to sleep, that kind of stuff. So we talked a little bit about the stress response, so it's built into us. In some ways, stress is also out there in our environment. Okay, so I'm trying to give you an understanding of kind of what stress really is about. So stress is also the things that are out there in your world. Okay, and early research on stress showed a strong link between the amount of life events someone experiences in a year and how likely they are to come down with an illness. Anybody heard of that kind of research? So checklists of stressful events. You kind of add up how many events you've had in the last year, and that's a pretty good predictor of whether you're going to come down with some kind of illness. That shows the connection. But what research has shown, it's not every kind of event. Okay? So really what happens is it's kind of how we see the event. Okay? So one of the things that would show up in this early research was holidays are stressful. Anybody heard that? Right? Holidays are stressful. But actually, research showed that holidays were mostly stressful for women. The relationship between events and illness goes away for men. Anybody want to guess why? See? All right. We had yeah and we don't care. That pretty much sums it up. Life events are mostly stressful when we see them in these ways, that they are negative, they represent some kind of threat to us, we cannot foresee them, and we cannot control them. So that's something that people have already talked about so far. So something like the holidays or seeking a job will mostly be stressful if you see it in these terms. Okay, and if you don't, it won't be stressful. This is just an example of this idea of stress being kind of out there. I don't know if you can see this very well, but it's a survey that the American Psychological Association does every year of what Americans find most stressful. And this is data going back several years. This one only goes up to 2010, but the results are pretty consistent year after year. And as you can see, the most common are worries about money, worries about work, worries about the economy. So if the job search process feels stressful, you're in good company, okay? Because almost everybody is worried about these kinds of things. But kind of moving from stress as something that's biological and built into us, something that's in our environment, the main thing that I'd like you to take away from today is that stress really is a perception. Okay? It's a perception of two things. And we call this appraisal. And the first thing we always do is primary appraisal. What am I up against? Okay, that's something that's kind of born into us. So if you think about the job search process, the first thing you're always going to be asking yourself is like, what's involved here? You know, what does it represent for me? Is it a negative thing? What's it going to take? How much of a threat does it represent to me? And the second thing we do is something we call a secondary appraisal, which we ask ourselves, what resources do I have? Okay, and this is something that we all do automatically every day. Okay, and the primary appraisal particularly starts very early. You ever seen, anybody have kids in here? Ever seen like a young child kind of has a toy they love? They start playing with it, and then another child comes along. What do? Right? They like, who's that? Is that a friend? Is that somebody who's going to mess with my toy? Like, that's the primary appraisal process. Who is this? You know, are they a friend? Are they going to take this away from me? Do I have another toy I can play with? It's something we're born with, and it's something we do every day. And basically, when we generally feel like those two things are in balance, yes, it's going to be hard, but I know I can do it, then we experience it as a challenge. And that's what several people have said, like positive stress, or some people call it eustress. But those two things are in balance. So in my work with teachers, when I ask them about their classrooms and what kinds of challenges do they have, what kinds of resources do they have, I measure that, and I find that when the teachers feel these things are in balance, they are usually satisfied with their jobs. And when they don't, when they feel those things are out of balance, they're usually looking for ways to leave the profession. And I've been able to show that relationship with hundreds and hundreds of teachers in different states. Okay? So this applies also to the job search process, is finding ways to keep those two things in balance. The level of your demands and then the level of your resources. And it almost doesn't matter exactly how high the demands are as long as you have the resources to meet them. Okay? But if you feel they're out of balance, if the demands become too high, that's when the stress response kicks in. And this is kind of a real simple way to show it on a slide. And I'm kind of going into some depth on this point because I think in day-to-day life we don't think about this too much. We kind of experience stress and we say, oh, that's because that's going on, or that's because this person said something to me, or I've got to do this particular task today. And we don't think about the fact that we maybe have some more choice than we think about the amount of stress we encounter in our daily lives. So demands refer to kind of anything that's going on that is possibly relevant to you. So it could be any parts of the job search process. It could be finances. It could be significant people in your life, things you've got to do, responsibilities you have as a spouse, as a parent. These are really just demands. But the important thing at this point is to realize they are just demands. They don't have to cause you stress necessarily. Does that make sense to everybody? They only become stressful when we go through this appraisal process. You know, it's kind of like a tax appraisal or something like that, like looking at the pros and cons, the benefits and the liabilities. And to do this, our primary appraisal is of the demand. And then our secondary appraisal, I have a little box over there. That's where we're kind of rummaging in our box of coping resources. Like kind of asking yourself, what do I have to do? What resources do I have that I can use to meet this demand? And then once you're through with that process, if you feel like your resources are not up to your demands, it becomes a stressor. A rainy day is supposed to mean like a bad day. I know in Austin that doesn't necessarily equate, but it's supposed to mean like cloudy skies, things aren't going so well. Here we love rain, I know, so I need to switch that up maybe. But if things are equal, it's a sunny day. Okay? Does that make sense so far? So I want to just kind of talk a little bit about that perceptual process. So when you're going through different aspects of the job search process, really what you're doing is conducting a lot of primary appraisals of what does this represent to me? How important is it to me? How soon do I need to find a new job? And this, I think the answers to all these questions will be different for each of you in this room. And that's why I want to just really emphasize the point that stress is perceptual. It's pretty subjective. What will happen to me if I don't find a job soon? Anybody else want to share examples of these kinds of thoughts? Like what kinds of thoughts come up to you when you think about job search process? Yes, ma'am.
One of the things I really work on doing is stay in the moment. If I start wasting my energy on what if I'm unemployed in a month or 2 months or 3 months, then I'm focusing on something that doesn't provide value for me.
Okay.
So I've learned to stay in today and what can I do today to impact that.
Okay. So the question really is, when you're thinking about different parts of the job search process, all of us probably have different thoughts that come to mind. You know, they're important to us. And so I think your example was to really try and keep that in perspective. Does anybody else have examples of just when you're thinking about job, just about the act of I'm looking for, like what kinds of thoughts come to mind? Yes, sir. Okay. Yeah, and that's, again, that's a primary appraisal in that we ask ourselves, is this something I can do? Either is it about a job or even about the whole process? And that's really where I work with a lot of clients is most of the time people know the industry they maybe worked in or that they've trained for, but the whole how do I find a job feels like something of a mystery. And so the question becomes, you know, what's this going to take? Am I going to be able to do this? Oh, yes, sir.
My biggest thought is how long is it going to take?
Yes.
I can handle a month. I can handle a year. I hate not knowing.
Yeah, great example. Great example. So how long will this take? Yes, sir.
Can you repeat the answers as soon as we can't hear them?
Thank you very much. Yeah, so the comments that came up most recently were, am I going to be able to do this? Do I have the skills necessary? And then how long is this going to take? Okay. So again, those are all just examples of things that when you're hearing new information, like in this Job Seekers Club, you hear people present stuff, and you're thinking about, well, can I do that? These are the questions you're probably asking yourself, you know, automatically without thinking about it. The second part of it is, what can I do to manage this demand? Okay, and that's the secondary appraisal. Call it primary and secondary because the first thing we always do is, what's this involved? What is this? What's it going to take? What am I being asked to do? How hard is this going to be? Second thing is, all right, now that I know what it is, what can I do about it? And this is also just as important because if you are kind of answering in ways that are going to help you, then it's going to be a less stressful process. So typically, when we're talking about secondary appraisals, we're asking these kinds of questions. Who can help me? How long do I have? Okay? And this sounds like the first question that we just talked about, like how long is the job going to take me? But really, they're kind of flip sides of both. So the primary appraisal is more like, what's going to happen if I don't get a job right away? The secondary appraisal is, well, I feel pretty confident I can get one in 2 months or 3 months, something like that. What do I know about it? Have I done this before? Often very important for job seekers. If you've been out there and found jobs a lot, you're probably going to answer that in a positive way and feel less stressed about job search. If it's new to you or you haven't really had to go through this, it might feel a little more stressful. Any other examples that people have of these kind of secondary ones? Yes, sir, in the back.
What value can I add to the company?
Great, yeah. So what value can I add? What do I have to offer? Am I doing enough? Yeah. Yeah. And if you can answer that affirmatively, then that's often helpful in keeping things manageable. If I can tell myself, I've done enough right now.
Do I need more education? And if I do, what's the return on the investment?
Okay, great. So is this going to require more training, or require more education? And if it does, is it going to be worth it? I don't have to tell you that education is very expensive these days. Training is expensive, education is expensive. And one of the things that's happening, I think, to many liberal arts students, at least in some colleges, is what's the return on investment? They spend a lot of money in majors that maybe don't translate to jobs. That's a talk for another day, but that's important. So I just want to leave this kind of part of the presentation with just this main idea that when the demands are too high, that's when you're going to experience stress the most. And that if you can keep those things relatively manageable, relatively at the same level, you're going to feel challenged and actually perform even better. And I really want to say that a lot of that is up to you if you're kind of thinking about stress in these terms. Talked about stress, I'm going to talk about coping. Okay, when stress is when we have something that represents a threat, coping is the things that we do to overcome that. This is I don't know if you can see that too well, it's little squares of bubble wrap. This was outside a store in Italy, and everyone played with those little packaging materials, and you pop them. Anybody do that? Like, doesn't it feel good? Like just popping those little bubbles. So at that side of the store in Italy, they had like a 5-minute popping bag, 10 minutes. Stress you have. I thought that was great. We used clay in one of our meetings we had a year ago where we were trying to just shape things in our department and talk about that, and it was just so therapeutic to have a ball of clay while we meet, because usually when I'm in meetings I get anxious and restless and a little bored, and just having clay or something like that really helped me. So I'm going to talk a little bit about coping. And basically coping refers to utilizing your resources to overcome demands, challenges, stressors. And coping resources really refer to any of the assets you have that help you deal with life demands. It can be skills that you have, other people, financial resources, your psychological mindset. All of that plays into the coping process. These are all resources we can use to help ourselves cope better. So even though we do have this evolutionary hangover of triggering the stress response, in modern times we have a lot more resources often to help us deal with things. So now I want to transition to what kinds of resources are most helpful for career transition. And basically there are those that are proactive in nature, okay, things that are going to help you prevent stress whenever possible, and are particularly helpful in kind of managing the career transition process. So drum roll, ready? All right, nice, thank you. So I use a little metaphor of a car to talk about these different kinds of resources. So that may work for some of you and it may not, but I don't want to just present them as a big grab bag. I want to talk about really how they function. So the first one I'm going to talk about is scanning. And this is a coping skill that involves the ability to kind of look ahead, forecast the future, and avoid things that could become stressors. Keep them at a manageable level so they don't become stressors. So if you've ever read books about coping or stress, a lot of times they focus on how you can manage stress better, right? Everybody heard that term, manage stress better? So I don't want you to manage stress better, because that just means you become stressed out and you're trying to keep it under control. That still takes a toll on you. What I would like for people to do is to be proactive whenever possible and avoid stress altogether. That's never completely possible, but I think we can do it more often than we give ourselves credit. So scanning is the first part. It's like a windshield in a car, right? Can't drive a car without being able to look down the road, see what's in front of you. Second, I think of it as like the wheels, the front tires on the car. Perceive control, because if you want to control a vehicle and turn your steering wheel, that's where you start, is the front wheels of the car. Social resourcefulness, which are the people along for the ride. Anybody taken a long trip recently in a car? Anybody done that? Did you do it alone or did you do it with other people? Alone? I think a long trip alone, well, maybe some people like the solitude, but I find it really hard just because I need somebody else to spell me on driving. I need somebody else to look at a map or look at their phone. So social resourcefulness is just basically referring to having other people along on the journey with you. And the last two are maintaining perspective and self-acceptance. And we kind of think of those as the back tires of the car, because those are things that are a little harder to control right away. Just like, you know, the end of the car, if you make a turn, is the back tires kind of follow the front, right? They follow their lead. So those are skills that you can develop in the long run, but are a little bit harder to change right away, as opposed to some of the other skills in the front. So I'm going to move ahead and talk a little bit about scanning. Scanning is basically a skill that people can develop that helps them look ahead, identify demands. Remember what demands are? What are demands? Things that are expected of you, but the key here is they have not become stressful. There's a difference between demands and stressors. Finding a job, all those things represent demands. right? I need to find information about job openings. I need to find information about how to market myself. Those are all demands. They only become stressors when you tell yourself, I don't have the resources to cope with that. I don't think I can do that. Then it becomes a stressor. Scanning involves looking down the road and identifying what parts of the job search process are going to be challenging for me and what can I do to cope with them better before they become stressors. Just like in a car, right? If you take driver's ed, they always tell you, you got to look a little bit ahead, right? Because what happens if you look too far down the road? Like if I'm staring at this mountain. Pardon? Yeah, I hit somebody, there might be a pothole in the road, that kind of stuff. What happens if I look just right in front of me when I'm driving? Yeah, you don't know where you're going, you can't anticipate things, or when you do anticipate them, you only have a second or two to react. I learned this very painfully when I started road biking. Because I road bike, I get my little bike, I'm riding on Palmer Lane usually, and I get tired and my head looks down and I'm only staring at what's in front of me. And I find that that just gives me enough time to realize, oh, I'm going to hit something, right? So I learned that no matter how tired I am, I have to look down the road a little bit and see whether somebody's bumper is fallen off or a snake has crawled on the road, and then I can do something about it, right? So it's the same kind of idea with scanning when you're thinking about that. And I'm not talking about particular job information here. I'm just talking about the general principle that the more you look ahead, the better chance you have of identifying something that's demanding and do something about it before it becomes a stressor. So in the context of job search, it involves a couple of things, I think. One thing that helps scanning is just to have as much information about yourself as possible. So this is something we work with people a lot, is really identifying your personality, your skills, your values, your interests. All of these things are going to help you kind of know more about yourself so you can kind of forecast in the future what kinds of career opportunities do I want to pursue. I encourage you to take advantage of even free career assessment tools that are out there. There are a bunch of free ones. Some of them are better than others, but the more information you have about yourself, not just about jobs that you've done, but skills that you have, personality, traits, all that kind of stuff is really going to help you understand yourself and kind of know where you're going. And I think the key thing is predict obstacles that can be avoided. Okay, by obstacles I mean things that are going to get in the way of finding the job that you want. And it doesn't just mean career, right? It could mean family obligations. I don't mean family gets in the way. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just saying for some people it can be hard to balance those responsibilities. And you don't want to be doing that in the moment. You want to be planning ahead and understanding, okay, I know on certain days I want to go to job club. I want to spend my weekends really working on my resume. How am I going to make that happen? How can I talk to my partner, to my family members, to my kids, so I have enough space to do what I need to do and I don't feel constantly under pressure? Another thing I think is being realistic about the time you can devote to career development. So if you're in the job search process, having a plan about how much can I devote to this each day, how much do I want to devote to this, because if you're like me, sometimes I'll set these ambitious goals, like I've got a deadline, I've got to write some article or manuscript. I'm going to spend all day Thursday working on it and make it perfect. And then I end up, because that's so overwhelming to me, I end up like searching the internet for a little while and watching YouTube, and I maybe spend 2 or 3 hours after I've like already beaten myself up for not working. And I usually will be much more effective if I just said, look, the most I can probably do is like 3 solid hours of writing in the morning and then go do other things. Okay? So again, this is all just involved in kind of looking ahead. And also this idea of developing a timeline. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is perceived control. And this is crucial. Really, if you want to boil it down, we talked about scanning, but really, if we perceive ourselves to be in control of events in our lives, they aren't going to cause us stress. And it is really a function of our perception. Okay, so the more that you can feel like I can influence about the job search process, the less stressed you'll be about all of it. So the important skill here is to really get good at identifying which parts of the job search process you can control and which you can't. Okay, and that may sound obvious, but a lot of times, again, I think we cause ourselves a lot of stress by trying to change things that we can't control, or not realizing things that we can control that we're not giving ourselves credit for doing so. So for things you can control, what I recommend is you set the clock ahead a little bit. And by set the clock ahead, I mean be a little bit more realistic than reality would suggest. Okay? A lot of research on mental health suggests that people who experience symptoms of depression actually see the world a lot more realistically than everybody else. Okay? And that makes them depressed, realistically so. So people who have a slightly more positive attitude than reality would justify oftentimes are able to keep going even in situations where they think, reality might suggest otherwise.
I was going to say for procrastinators, sometimes the best thing to do is the hardest part first, because once you get that done,
Yeah.
you feel like you've overcome a big challenge and everything else seems a lot easier. When you put it off, all you do is worry about that big thing you got.
Yeah, that's a great example. So lining things up so you can, the thing where maybe I don't feel as much control where I need the most help. And again, that makes a lot of sense. So it's something really hard, know when the best time to do that is. Like for me, writing really goes better, and this may apply to you if you're like working on a resume or things like that in the morning. Because in the afternoon I'm usually tired, and I can do a lot of stuff like answer email or stuff like that, but I don't function well like doing anything creative in the morning. So you want to decide what things can you control and which are worth your energy. Never underestimate the value of just ignoring some things. Okay? Some things just aren't worth your attention, or they aren't worth doing well. I kind of put my taxes in that category. Yeah, I got to do it, but I don't have to do it great. I just have to do enough to like get all the deductions I'm entitled to and do the best I can. Okay? But something like a resume really needs your absolute best effort. Right? So it's really understanding which things can I control and which things I can, and where should I spend my energy. If you do encounter things that you cannot control, I suggest some of these things. Exercise, relaxation, support from others. Again, that may sound obvious, but if you're a job seeker, your main goal should be, again, find a job, take care of yourself. You absolutely have to devote time to that, taking care of yourself. Because it is a hard process, and you maybe don't know how long it will take. And if you're in it for the long run, you've got to take care of it. I'll use another metaphor of like running a marathon, right? What do they do in a marathon? Every mile or two, they stop, they get water, they get food, all that kinds of stuff. You can't run a marathon by skipping those steps. Things you may not be able to control about the job search, I'm just listing these. Your gender, your age, your ethnic, racial background, your family, your current level of training, your savings. These are things that may affect your job search process. There are certain fields that are dominated more by men or women that you may be up against particular struggles, but these are things you really can't control necessarily. Others that are uncontrollable? Yes, sir.
Apparently a gentleman from Hollywood changed his name from Jose to Joe, and all of a sudden all the...
Yeah. Yeah, that's a whole. That actually, research shows that over and over. Unfortunately, that for certain jobs, it could be the exact same resume, but the name and what it implies about your background can affect the kind of return you get. Yeah, yeah. And again, I'm not saying change your name or anything necessarily. It's just like, be aware of things you can control and those you can't. Things you may be able to control: where you live. People have access to contacts, how many people are in your job search network, access to information, what you spend. What else? Anything else that are things you can really control in the job search process? Anybody else want to give an example? Uh-oh. Yes, ma'am.
This may be something you can't control, but if somebody is naturally pessimistic and negative in the way that they look at this, and other people are naturally kind of optimistic about their chances, is there a way that you can help that negative person
Yes.
be more positive?
Yes. I'm going to get to that.
You are?
Yes.
You are pharmaceutical?
Well, let's just say there are a variety of strategies one can use, and yeah. Anything else? All right. Yeah, and I put that like may not be able to, because I don't want to suggest that there's anything you absolutely have no influence over, but go ahead. Yeah. Right. Right. Prepare accordingly. Exactly. Yes, ma'am, in the back.
There's some things health-wise that you cannot control.
Yes. Would you, like, such as?
Cancer,
Yes.
chronic diseases.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that could really. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. So the example in the back was another thing you may not be able to control is your health status. So if you have some kind of medical condition, something like that, that may be something you can't control. All right, so I'm going to move ahead here and talk about social resourcefulness a little bit. And really, people are the key to any successful job search strategy. So these are skills that are really important to kind of cultivate those social networks. Social support, and I think job clubs are a great example of that. Getting social support, getting information, all of these things really come from other people. So I use the word social resourcefulness to talk about the fact that really that has to do with really cultivating relationships with other people. And some of us feel good about doing that. Some of us, that's a little bit more of a challenge. But I think the key really for me in developing that, as far as making that a more effective strategy, is to make deposits, not just withdrawals. Because what happens to a bank account if you just keep going back and back and back and making withdrawals? It goes away, right? And then it stops being a resource for you. You got to make deposits. So a lot of the work that psychologists do with people who feel disconnected or have interpersonal kinds of things is we put them in groups, put them around other people, and usually it's by being in a group and helping other people that you develop your own social resources. Does that make sense? So again, things like this are I just want to recommend as just really important to have other people around you. So we were talking a little bit about pessimism. So these are the back two tires of the car. So they're a little bit harder to work on sometimes directly, but they can still be changed. And so the fourth coping skill I want to talk about is maintaining perspective. Yes?
I wanted to jump back to your last slide and talk about volunteer opportunities and helping others, because one thing that I found through this process is I'm going through a career change, which is extremely intimidating, but by volunteering my time for an organization and putting myself in a challenge where it's a little outside of my comfort zone, but it's very rewarding to me personally. It gives me an opportunity to realize I can change,
That's a great example.
different.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm not stuck in, it's all about me,
Yes.
it's worrying about me, and it's been extremely rewarding for me. And the other thing is, because I'm not getting paid for it, there are expectations from the organization. It's not going to impact my financial goals, right? It's really about moving for them and getting something for myself. So I can't stress how helpful that is. And you meet people along the way.
Yeah, and you never know. Sometimes it turns into things that because of the fact that you're not trying to make that happen right then, these things just kind of come your way. I think that's a great example. Yeah, so just finding ways to connect with other people really is beneficial just for our own mental health. I mean, I think to a large extent we are social creatures. And when we're under a lot of stress, sometimes there's a tendency to kind of withdraw and focus so much on ourselves. So, and you can think of it, like I think of it too when I go into like a doctor's office. I hate when they just leave you there alone in your shorts or some kind of gown on. I want someone to talk to because I don't want to think about myself or what kinds of tests are about to be done to me, right? But I find if I have someone to talk to, I forget about that. I lose myself in talking to another person. But if they leave me in there alone, I'm just sitting there and shivering and, All right, so I'm going to move ahead so I keep track of time here. So maintaining perspective is a little bit harder. This is I don't know if you can see it. This is a picture of the Earth from the Voyager satellite from like 4 billion miles away. And I'm using this as an example of maintaining perspective because I think sometimes when you think of all the little things that we can kind of worry and obsess about, that's what the Earth looks like from 4 billion. It just kind of puts things in perspective, like how big the universe is or how vast and how small some of our concerns are compared to like the larger world. And so really what this involves is big picture thinking. So if you want to improve your ability to maintain perspective, during the job search process. One of the things that's really helpful is to try and remind yourself of the big picture whenever possible. And this is yet another thing that maybe you say, well, that sounds pretty obvious, but most people don't do it. We have to remind ourselves to do it because we get so focused on what's in front of us. So big picture thinking is really asking yourself the larger questions. How is what I'm doing right now fitting into my long-term goals? Is this really going to help me with where I want to be? Those kinds of questions are really important. Don't spend much time looking in the rearview mirror. Okay, so I talked about scanning in the front window of the car. Where's your rearview mirror? How big is it? It's about yay big, right? Your windshield's like this, your rearview mirror is like yay big. That's because when you're driving a car, you don't want to spend most of your time looking in the rearview mirror, right? What happens? You got off the road, right? You crash. People who spend a lot of time worrying about what's already passed, that's kind of like a metaphor I'd use, is that you need to look in there every now and then when you're changing lanes or making corrections, kind of look in the back, see what's behind me. But the reason that thing is so small and out of the way is because we're not supposed to spend much time looking there. It's not helpful. Same kind of thing for this. Don't spend much time, so if you missed an opportunity for a job lead or you said the wrong thing in an interview, like learn from it and move on. Don't obsess on this rearview mirror. Another phrase I like is hunt lions, not mice. I don't know if you all have heard this story. There's this kind of story that was circulated that lions in the jungle can spend all day capturing and eating mice. It's pretty easy for them. But they will actually starve to death if that's all they do. Those are the things that are really easy to do and right in front of them. But the energy the lion spends chasing the mice is not made up for by the calories they get. So they really need to focus on hunting lions, which will give them the benefit they need. So I think of that same way for jobs. Spend your time doing things that are really going to help you in the long run, even though there are things right in front of you that might be easier. And then the final one I want to mention is self-acceptance. So this is kind of related to maintaining perspective, but this is more about our belief system. So particularly important, I think, when you're job searching, which is be aware of irrational beliefs that can cause you stress about the job search process. We call these the killer bees, okay? Because when we have irrational beliefs about ourselves, about the world, about our circumstances, we are going to constantly be putting ourselves into stressful situations. So if I tell myself I must be perfect to land a job, I'm going to be miserable because I'm not perfect. And there's no evidence to suggest that I have to be perfect to land a job. Look at me, I'm working at UT. But it would get in the way if I was going to interview there to like tell myself, well, they're not going to accept me unless all my research is perfect and unless I've been a perfect teacher and all this kind of stuff would get in the way of my ability to interview. Another one is other people owe me a job. Okay? I mean, it'd be nice if it was that way, but it's really not. And again, these are things that we can sometimes tell ourselves that can cause us a lot more stress. So if we can identify when we're telling ourselves these things, and they're very automatic. They're very automatic. So if you find yourself telling yourself these things, the most important thing to do is to try and catch yourself doing that. That is the main strategy for working on self-acceptance, is just to catch yourself doing that. Telling yourself these things like, I don't think I can do this, I don't think I can handle this, if things don't go perfectly at the interview, I won't get the job. We're all going to do those kinds of things, but it's important to catch ourselves doing that, because then you can stop and say, wait a minute, is that really true? Chris McCarthy got a job at UT. Surely I can do this as well. Okay? Does that make sense? So let me talk about what do I do about all this? So one of the things that I think is really important is to just take inventory of these kinds of resources as you're doing this kind of job searching process, doing all the wonderful things you're already doing, connecting with others, learning how to market yourself, looking for openings, is to also kind of take an inventory of yourself. Like, where am I with these resources? And we're all at different levels. There's really no bad or good about these. I think all of us can stand to work on these things. But really, are there particular resources that are kind of getting in the way for you in your job search process? And then develop them either through assessing yourself, working with someone who does this professionally, and then just kind of practicing them. So this is an example. I know you can't see this, but when we work with clients, we actually do an inventory of these kind of skills. So we have a whole database, and we can kind of tell people, well, these are strengths that you have, or these are areas that you might want to work on a little bit. But I want to leave you with, do I have like a few more minutes here? So let's give you an example of like practicing the skill of scanning. Okay, so I just took a hypothetical example, and I'm just going to kind of step by step say, well, here's some ideas about how using this example one might work on becoming a better scanner. So again, it's all about practice. So one of the potential demand for a job seeker is to identify, well, what kinds of things could cause me stress, could get in my way, but do that before they actually become stressors for you. That's the key. If it's already a stressor, then you're just in combat mode, okay? You can't be proactive about something. So if your family is already like not on board with your job search process or causing you a lot of stress through things they need from you, like that's already a stressor. But if you can think about things, well, that's not a stressor for me right now, but I really want their support. Whoever family is, whether it's kids, spouses, parents, the job search process involves everybody. It's not just you, okay? And they can be either a source of strength or they can be a potential demand. So in this example would be someone who's job searching identifies, well, one thing I know that I'm in scanning ahead, looking ahead, is I need to get my family on my side. I need their support. The first step in becoming a better scanner is to really evaluate what could be demanding about this situation, right? Because if my family has given me nothing but love, given me nothing but help, that's not even on our radar, right? It's only becomes a demand when there's like something out here I'm not really sure about. I'm not really sure how this is going to go. I'm not sure my partner's on board. The first step in really becoming a better scanner is to really consciously evaluate, well, why is that so burdened? Why do I think that could be a demand for me? So it's to ask yourself questions like, my significant other is really worried about money. Okay, well that's why it might be demanding for you. Or I don't want to be a burden to them. Okay, these are things that just you want to be able to recognize what thought process am I going through and to really identify what you're telling yourself. The next example is, okay, this is the same example. Do you want to think about how the situation became a possible demand for you? Okay, so now that I think it's a demand, how did it get that way? Did I get some kind of signal from my partner? Did something happen with my family's financial situation? Is there something coming up for my kids that's going to be really hard? So you want to be able to ask these questions about like, what has changed? How has this become a demand for you? And you want to think about like, how can I address this situation? What information do I need? What information do I have? How much attention have I given to this? And the next step then is, again, while this is still on your radar but not a stressor, I want to think about what do I want to have happen next? What information would I want to gather? What actions would I like to take? Who can help me? This is all hypothetical because when you're scanning, that's what you're kind of doing. You're kind of trying to take an unknown situation and turn it into as best a situation as you can. That's why I'm phrasing these hypothetically. And then finally, when you're thinking about this situation, what are the takeaways? How important is this to me? What steps seem most reasonable at this point? How will I know when this has been resolved? Okay? Does that make sense? So those are like kind of things to help you really forecast ahead. Where is the stress coming from? What can I do about it? And it is kind of hypothetical, which makes it a little bit hard. Most of us are really good at reacting to things that are right in our face. But it's a little bit harder to kind of look ahead and forecast what am I going to do about this situation while it's still not yet a stressor. So I will leave you with that, and thank you for your time. If you have questions or want to contact us, that's our information, or we have some of our crew in the back. And thank you.